Hello, and a very, very warm welcome to you. I'm just so glad you could join us today.
It is a wonderful privilege to be here with you both.
Whether you are, enjoying a quiet morning with a warm cup of tea, or perhaps resting in your favorite chair after a long day, we are truly honored to share this time with you. You are listening to a special deep dive right here on the FAMOSIQ channel.
That is exactly right. And as you may already know, FAMOSIQ is dedicated to bringing you stories that really matter. Stories of history, of profound resilience, and, well, of the enduring power of the human spirit.
It really is a space for thoughtful reflection. And I want to start our conversation today with a question for you, our dear listener, and for you as well. It is a difficult one to ponder, perhaps.
I am ready. What is the question?
How does a person survive when the whole world decides to turn its back on them? And I do not mean just a few harsh critics. I mean, how do you keep walking forward when the praise turns to absolute scorn and the doors that were once thrown wide open are suddenly and violently slammed shut in your face?
Oh my. That is a scenario that would, frankly, break the spirit of most people.
It really would.
It requires more than just patience. It requires a specific kind of internal fortification. A quiet iron in the soul, you might say. It is the ability to stand tall and say, I am still here, even when the world wishes you were not.
Well, today, we are going to explore the life of a woman who possessed exactly that kind of iron. We're taking a deep dive into the life of Marianne Faithfull.
A truly remarkable woman.
As many of you undoubtedly know, Marianne passed away recently on January 30th, 2025. It marked the end of a truly singular, deeply lived life.
A significant loss to the arts indeed. But looking at the extensive research we have gathered for this deep dive, it is quite clear this is not just a standard biography of a singer.
No, not at all.
If we look closer, it is a profound study in what we might call the courage of imperfection. It is a story about the cruelty of public opinion, yes, but much more importantly, it is about how one woman rebuilt her life from the ashes, brick by brick.
It is a moving narrative, and it is one we are very proud to share here on FAMOSIQ. Now, before we fully immerse ourselves in the London of the 1960s, if you appreciate these kinds of thoughtful, slow-paced discussions about real life and history, please do take a moment right now to click the like button.
Yes, and do share this with a friend or a family member who might find comfort or inspiration in it.
Absolutely. And please subscribe to our channel, FAMOSIQ. Your continued support is what allows us to keep these important stories alive and accessible. So let us go back in time. Let us set the scene in 1964.
London, 1964. It was a very, very different world back then.
It certainly was. It was the absolute height of what they called swinging London, a massive cultural explosion of music, fashion, and youth. And right in the shining center of it all was Marianne Faithfull.
She was just 17 years old at the time.
It is hard to even imagine, isn't it? Being 17 and having the eyes of the whole world fixed directly upon you. She was known to the press and the public as the Angel. She had this massive, sweeping hit song called As Tears Go By.
It is a beautifully haunting song. If you listen to that original recording today, it is a very melancholic, almost weary melody for such a young girl to be singing.
And her voice at that time, the descriptions in the source material are quite specific about it. They called her voice crystal clear, high, and pure. She had this long blonde hair and an innocent, wide-eyed look that just captivated millions of people. She really was the visual symbol of that entire era.
She was the ultimate symbol, yes. But this is where we have to be very careful not to fall for the myth or the marketing.
Right.
The sources we reviewed are very clear that the image the public fell in love with, this aristocratic angel, was a bit of a mirage. It was a highly polished surface.
A facade, really.
Exactly. The reality of her background was far more complex and, frankly, quite tragic.
Let us unpack that a bit, because on paper, if you just read the basic facts, her biography reads a bit like a fairy tale. Her father was an officer in British intelligence and a university professor.
Very respectable.
And her mother was a baroness from Austro-Hungarian nobility, a ballerina, no less. To the outside observer, that sounds like an incredibly privileged, wealthy upbringing.
It certainly sounds like the start of a charmed life. But the historical research tells us that this aristocratic beginning was fractured very early on. Her parents divorced when she was quite young.
And in the late 1940s and 50s, that was not nearly as common as it is today.
No, it carried a stigma, and it created a lot of instability for a child.
So she did not stay in that wealthy, high society environment.
No, not at all. She moved with her mother to Reading in Berkshire. And this was not a life of grand balls and expensive gowns. They lived in poverty. The source material specifically notes that it was a time of profound privation for them.
Oh, that is such a sharp contrast.
It is. And there is a medical detail here in the sources that really just breaks your heart. As a child, little Marianne suffered from tuberculosis.
Tuberculosis? Goodness. I tend to think of that as a disease from a much older, darker era, or something we only read about in history books. That must have been absolutely terrifying for a child.
It was very serious. She was physically frail, constantly battling chronic illness just to breathe normally. Now, I want you to think about the psychology of that for a moment.
It must have been overwhelming.
When you combine poverty, a broken home, and a life-threatening illness, it fundamentally shapes a child's view of the world. The sources describe her as having a deep fear of loss ingrained in her. It was not just a passing worry, it was a constant, heavy anxiety.
That makes perfect sense. If you grow up afraid that your health, your home, or your family might just disappear at any moment, that anxiety becomes a part of the fabric of who you are.
Precisely. And then, to add to that sense of isolation, she attended a very strict convent school.
I imagine that was quite rigid.
It was a place of cold discipline and long silences. For a child who already felt abandoned by the world, this was not peaceful, it was stifling. But, and here's the creative spark that begins to define her, she used art and theater as an escape.
She found a way out through expression.
Yes, she wanted to be heard. She desperately wanted to express that deep reservoir of sadness she had been carrying since she was a little girl.
So when she stepped onto that stage in 1964 with that big hit song, she was not just a pretty face who got lucky. She was a young woman carrying a lot of old, heavy wounds, using her voice just to survive.
Exactly. But the world did not see the wounds. The public did not care about the poverty in Reading or the childhood tuberculosis. They just saw the perfect angel. And that disconnect brings us to the real tragedy of her fame.
The situation shifted quite dramatically.
It did. She became what they called a muse. She started a highly publicized relationship with Mick Jagger of the Rolling Stones. She was right in the center of that massive cultural whirlwind.
You know, I have always found the term muse to be a bit double-edged. Well, it sounds very romantic on the surface, but it is actually quite diminishing, isn't it? It is almost like saying her only job, her only value, was to inspire the men around her to do great work rather than doing great work herself.
It is exactly that. It completely strips the woman of her agency. Society essentially reduced her to an appendage of a famous man, and we must remember she was already a mother at 18.
Right, she had a son.
She had a real life, a child, heavy responsibilities, yet the press treated her like a delicate doll to be dressed up and looked at. And then came 1967.
Yes, 1967.
This is the major turning point in our deep dive today. The infamous Redlands raid.
This is a famous, or perhaps infamous moment in music history. For our listeners who might not recall the specific details from that time, police stormed the home of Keith Richards looking for illegal drugs. And Marianne was there when it happened.
She was there. And this event, according to the deep analysis in our sources, reveals the absolute core conflict of her life. It exposes a terrible, glaring double standard that existed then and arguably still exists in many forms today.
A double standard regarding how men and women are treated.
Yes. The men, Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, were caught in the exact same situation, in the exact same room. But look at how the public and the press treated them versus how they treated her.
Well, from what I recall of the era, the Rolling Stones were marketed as the bad boys of rock and roll. Getting arrested almost made them more popular. It solidified their image as rebels against the establishment.
You are spot on. They were branded as outlaws, which actually enhanced their careers. It made them cool. It gave them a dangerous edge that sold records. But Marianne...
The press was not so kind to her.
Not at all. She was branded a sinner. She was called degenerate. The media absolutely destroyed her reputation overnight.
It really does feel incredibly unfair when you look back at it with clear eyes. Why was the young woman blamed and publicly shamed while the men were celebrated for the exact same behavior?
It was a blatant act of gender discrimination. She became a convenient scapegoat for all the anxieties the older generation was feeling about the changing culture at that time. The source material uses a very powerful, visceral metaphor here.
What is the metaphor?
It says her fall from grace was like agonizing surgery performed without anesthesia right in front of millions of people.
Goodness. Surgery without anesthesia. That is a chilling image. It implies she was wide awake and feeling every single bit of the pain while the public just watched for entertainment.
It captures the sheer brutality of it perfectly. She was entirely stripped of her dignity, and the real-world consequences were severe and immediate.
Her career stalled.
It evaporated. She lost film roles. She lost her credibility in the music industry. She was socially ostracized. People in her circle literally stopped talking to her. She was just a young woman, really, and she was crushed by the immense weight of that public judgment.
And this rapid decline led to what the sources refer to as the dark years, the late 1960s and early 1970s. And I think it is so important that we talk about this part of her life with deep compassion.
I completely agree.
Sometimes history books frame this period as just a wild rock and roll lifestyle phase. But looking at the documented facts we have, this was a life or death crisis.
It was a fight for survival. We are not talking about glamorous partying. We are talking about literal homelessness. We are talking about a young woman living rough on the streets of Soho in London.
Living on the streets.
Yes, and battling severe addiction. There were even suicide attempts documented during this time. She had lost custody of her young son. She lost her home, her money, her friends.
It is just heartbreaking to think about. She went from the very top of the music charts, dining with the elite, to sleeping on the streets in such an incredibly short amount of time.
It is a devastating drop, and we must insist on viewing this correctly. This was not some sensational tragedy produced for our entertainment. This was the direct result of a fragile young person who had absolutely no support system, breaking down under immense cruel pressure. She had been cast out by society.
And during this terribly dark time, something physically happened to her that would forever change her destiny as an artist. She lost her voice.
Yes. This is a crucial, heartbreaking detail. That crystal clear, high soprano, the pure voice of the angel that everyone had loved so much, simply vanished.
From the harsh conditions, I assume.
Exactly. The severe drug use, the chronic bouts of bronchitis, the reality of living in the damp and cold on the streets, it all took a heavy physical toll on her vocal cords. That original voice was gone forever.
You know, for most singers, that would be the absolute end of the road. Your voice is your instrument.
Yeah.
If you lose it, especially if you are famous for a very specific, pure sound, the career is over. You disappear into history.
Most people would have disappeared. And frankly, society fully expected her to disappear. She was written off by the press as a cautionary tale, just another tragic figure of the 60s. But Marianne Faithfull did something miraculous.
She did not give up.
She refused to follow the tragic script that society had so neatly written for her.
This is the part of the story I find most deeply inspiring. The resurrection. It is 1979, more than a full decade after her terrible fall from grace. She releases an album called Broken English.
A true masterpiece. It is considered a seminal record in modern music history.
But for listeners who might have remembered her early sweet work from the 60s, Broken English sounded completely different, did it not?
Completely unrecognizable. If you put on that record in 1979 expecting to hear the sweet girl singing As Tears Go By, you would be profoundly shocked.
The angel was gone.
You did not hear the angel anymore. You heard a voice that was deeply cracked. It was husky, it was gravelly, it was significantly lower in register. It was a voice that was visibly scarred by life.
I can imagine some music critics at the time might have boldly claimed her voice was ruined.
Some certainly did say that, but that is where her story gets so fascinating. She did not try to hide the damage. She did not use studio tricks to try to sound pretty again.
She embraced it.
She used that broken voice to tell the absolute truth. Our sources described the Broken English album as an unvarnished confession.
So instead of hiding the damage she had endured, she actually used it as a brand new instrument.
Exactly. She turned her deep wounds into powerful art. That gravelly, worn voice carried the heavy weight of her pain, her anger, and her emptiness. It had a rich texture that a pure, untested voice simply cannot possess.
It felt real.
It was entirely authentic, and that is exactly why it resonated so deeply with people who heard it. She showed the world that a woman does not have to be pristine and perfect to be powerful. In fact, her true power came directly from her imperfections.
The courage of imperfection. That's such a wonderful phrase from our research. It reminds me that we all have scars, do we not?
Every single one of us.
Maybe not from global fame or public scandal, but simply from living a long life. As we get older, we all carry the physical and emotional marks of our journey, and there is immense dignity in those scars.
There is profound dignity in surviving. By releasing that album and bearing her soul, she completely redefined her own worth. She was not just the silent muse anymore. She was not just Mick Jagger's tragic ex-girlfriend.
She became the author of her own life.
She was the artist. She was the one telling the story now, and she was doing it entirely on her own terms.
And she kept telling that story for a very long time. She did not just have one lucky comeback and then vanish again. She kept working steadily for decades.
She certainly did. She proved to be an incredibly versatile and enduring talent. She explored jazz, she sang the blues, she performed cabaret. Over the years, she matured into a highly respected elder stateswoman in the arts.
A true survivor.
There is a beautiful detail in the sources regarding her later years that I think you will appreciate. She actually went back into the studio and re-recorded that very first hit song, As Tears Go By.
The same song from when she was just 17.
Yeah.
That must have been an incredibly emotional experience for her.
I imagine it was profoundly moving. But this time, she sang it as a mature woman, with that deeper, richer, weather-beaten voice. She reclaimed the song.
It must have had a completely different meaning.
It did. It was not an innocent, naive song anymore. It became a song about looking back at a long, difficult, but ultimately triumphant life. She took full ownership of her own history, including all the painful parts.
That is so empowering to hear. It is not about trying to erase the past or pretend the bad things never happened, but rather integrating all of it into who you are today.
Absolutely.
As we mentioned at the start of our deep dive, she eventually passed away in 2025, just recently. And she left behind her final, critically acclaimed work, an album called Burning Moonlight.
And by all accounts she passed away very peacefully, which, when you consider where she had been sleeping on cold walls in Soho, battling severe addiction written off by the world, is a massive victory in itself.
A quiet triumph.
She survived the worst of it. She outlived all the cruel predictions people made about her.
So when we sit back and look at her life as a whole, from that strict convent school to the cold streets of London, and finally back to the stage, what is the real lesson here for us? What should we, as listeners navigating our own lives, take away from the story of Marianne Faithfull?
I think the expert takeaway, the real nugget of wisdom to hold on to, is that her true legacy is not the scandal. It is not the cheap gossip of the 1960s. It is that unwavering resilience.
Resilience.
She taught us that raw honesty is far more enduring than glittery, superficial fame. In many ways, she was a mirror held up to society.
A mirror. In what sense do you mean?
She exposed how incredibly cruel we can be to women who do not neatly fit the mold we create for them. But simultaneously, she showed that a person can survive that cruelty.
You can come back from the brink.
You can rebuild yourself, even if you are a little broken, even if your voice has changed entirely, even if you are not at all the same person you were when you were 17.
That is such a deeply comforting thought. We do not have to be perfect to be worthy of love and respect. We just have to be true to ourselves.
Precisely. The cracks in the armor are where the light gets in, as the old saying goes. Or, in her specific case, the cracks are where the beautiful music came out.
It really changes how I think about the concepts of ruin or failure. It is not the end of the book. It is just the texture of the story.
It is the texture of a real life. And in the end, that texture is so much more interesting and beautiful than a smooth, untouched surface. It proves that we have truly lived.
Well, we have covered quite an incredible journey today. From a fragile young angel to a woman of absolute steel who completely reshaped her own destiny. It is a story I think will stay with me for a very long time.
I completely agree. And I would love to leave our listeners with one final provocative thought to mull over as they go about the rest of their day.
Please do.
In a world that is so constantly obsessed with perfect images, filters on photographs, flawless lifestyles on television, the immense pressure to never make a single mistake, can we learn to genuinely value the scars and the cracks in people just as much as we value their polish?
That is quite a thought.
Because the life of Marianne Faithfull proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the cracks are where the real story lies.
That is a truly beautiful question to ponder. Can we value the scars? I certainly hope we can learn to do so.
As do I.
Thank you so much for guiding us through this remarkable story today. It has been a deeply meaningful and moving discussion.
It has been my absolute privilege. Thank you for having me.
And thank you, our dear listener, for inviting us into your home and joining us on this deep dive. We so appreciate your time and your warm attention. If you found value in this story of resilience today, please do remember to subscribe to our channel, FAMOSIQ.
Yes, please do join the FAMOSIQ community. We have so many more wonderful stories to share with you.
Your support truly helps us continue to bring you these kinds of important histories. Until next time, take very good care of yourselves, and please remember, your own story, scars and all, is always worth telling. Goodbye for now.
Goodbye, and take care.